Welcome to our webinar this evening about fertility. I'm Hilary from Fertility Network. I'm based in Northern Ireland. Our charity is UK-wide, and I'm joined tonight by my colleague Rachel Ross, who's also based in Northern Ireland, and three members of the Education Authority team who are going to speak to you also at the beginning and will be available for questions at the end. This evening, we're going to look at all things fertility. We're going to talk about what help and treatment is available for you in Northern Ireland, and also how we can support you throughout your journey, because we recognise that the fertility journey is very private, sometimes very difficult, and support is very important for you along the way. So we'll be looking at the impact of infertility and how it relates also to the workplace and what can be done to improve things in the workplace. So there'll be time for you to put questions into the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. And hopefully you'll be able to type in your questions, and we will record this webinar, but we will pause that before the Q&A to retain anonymity on the questions, and the questions will only be seen by the panelists, so you have confidentiality assured. However, in terms of the questions, Rachel and I are not able to answer individual specific medical queries tonight, so I hope you'll bear with us on that one. And you may have burning questions. You're very welcome to contact us after the event. Our emails will be on one of the final slides. We'll do our best to signpost you to anyone or someone within our organisation, maybe our fertility nurses, for example, who can help you find out the information you need, or we can signpost them to the right information. I hope that, as this is a very sensitive issue, that you are not triggered by anything that we tell you in the webinar tonight. I hope that it's not a difficult programme for you to watch. I hope it's helpful and informative. But if you should feel uncomfortable about anything, do get in touch with us afterwards. And I think Anne's going to have a quick word with you now about herself and her colleagues' role within the Education Authority.
Thanks, Hilary. Look, just really to say that we're delighted to have Hilary and Rachel here from Fertility Network to deliver this session. And just to introduce, I suppose, the three of us. So we have Julie Ferry from the Health and Wellbeing team here today, and we have Emma Patterson from the Education Authority's Equality and Diversity Unit, and I'm Anne Rath from the Health and Wellbeing team. And if at the end of this anyone has any particular questions or in relation to EI-wide issues regarding fertility, if you want to contact Hilary, and she will then forward our email addresses. I realise not everyone may have our email addresses, so Hilary will forward our details on to you. Also, just want to recognise that, as Hilary has pointed out, that some people may find the session difficult, and I just want to remind people of the Inspire confidential counselling service. And again, I can give the details of the Inspire contact telephone number to Hilary to share with you. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you back to Hilary. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Anne. It's really lovely to be here tonight, and I hope, although I can't see any of you and we can't interact directly, I hope it will be still informal for you anyway. So I'm going to share my screen. Bear with me 1 wee second while I share my slides. Let's hoping it all works. And hopefully you can see them all now. If you find that the bar with our pictures in is too big, you can minimize that if that helps you to see more of the slides. So I suppose really it's a very big subject, fertility, and very diverse subject. So I brought all sorts of thoughts to you tonight to try and talk a little bit about why it's important for us to talk about fertility, and why perhaps as a society, we maybe need to be more open about fertility and talk about it at a much earlier stage, because Very many people find that they don't realize some of the factors that can affect their fertility until much later in life, and it can be very difficult for them then. Now, as a nation, as a global community, we're all leaving having children until a bit later in life, and so that can also be a little bit more difficult because we know that fertility starts to decline a little bit. So I brought along tonight some myths and truths for you to see, because there's a lot of issues about fertility that are not commonly known. So the first one was infertility isn't a common problem. So I'm sure that some of you would know the answer to that already. And in fact, the answer to that is that 1 in 6 couples struggle to become parents. It's a huge number of people. We're talking about maybe across the UK, 3.5 million people who maybe face some kind of fertility issue. And that can be for, many different reasons, which I'll look at a little bit more with you. Here's another one. It's always been thought, any problem with fertility was down to the woman, so that infertility was a female issue. Probably now we understand that it's a very equally split situation. It takes both a female and a male partner to make a baby. And we find that a male factor is about 1/3 of the problem, as is female issues. So that leaves 1/3 remaining, which is technically classed as unexplained. And just because we can't explain some of the infertility in that sector doesn't mean to say there isn't actually a reason. It probably just means we don't know yet what that reason is. And fertility treatment, IVF itself, for example, is a fairly new technology. It's progressed so fast. We now have such great technology involved in it that things are really improving, and people are understanding more and more what are maybe the factors behind infertility, but there are still some things that are unexplained. And that's a very frustrating diagnosis to have when there isn't a particularly obvious problem, and yet still a pregnancy isn't happening. So here's another one. We know that a woman's age can affect fertility, but it was long talked about, rock stars having babies into their 70s. And so it was thought a man's age doesn't affect his fertility. Well, actually, we know now that sperm quality declines itself. So sperm is made up of the head of the sperm with the DNA content in it, which is half the equation to make the embryo that makes a baby. And so as men age, their sperm actually can decline in quality. It may also just decline in quantity, but it's this quality aspect that can actually mean that the actual fertilization of the egg doesn't take place. And so that can lead to problems in fertility. So again, infertility, it's not a lifestyle issue. It's not a choice of whether you do or you don't. It's actually a medical condition defined by the World Health Organization. And that is actually encompassed also in the NICE guidelines about fertility treatment, in terms of recognizing that this is a disease of the reproductive system, and therefore recommended treatment would be some type of assisted conception, whether that's IVF or other types of treatment. And that age affects both male and female. And this, of course, has, because we were talking about the workplace, this has quite an effect on employees. Who does it affect? Well, again, we've talked about 1 in 6 people. And we know from our research, which I will touch on again, is that it's a super stressor in people's lives. It's one of the major events in people's lives which would rank very highly in terms of causing stress and depression. 90% of a large-scale survey that we carried out in 2016 showed that 90% of people who go through fertility treatment or through a fertility journey, whether they're successful or not, suffer elements of stress and depression. And that can impact on your organization as well. If you're working for an organization and you have to take stress-related illness, that can have an effect too. So in terms of well-being, then 1 in 3 men felt that fertility issues had a negative impact on their work. 85% of individuals said having treatment affected the day-to-day work, and 19% reduced their hours or resigned. In some parts of the UK, including Northern Ireland, stress can also be due to a lack of NHS funding for treatments. The treatments are funded differently in different parts of the UK, and the NICE guidelines gold standard of 3 cycles of IVF is really only available in Scotland. But and in Northern Ireland, we have had 1 partial treatment for some time, as some of you may know. But the good news is that in working currently with the Department of Health as part of their new IVF project board, they have made a commitment to move to 3 cycles of IVF, ultimately 3, possibly perhaps a staggered move to 2 and then to 3. And this is going to really increase people's chance of actually being able to conceive and have a family of their own. So you may be just at a process of considering your fertility. You may be in the middle of treatment, you may be at all sorts of different stages, but there are a few considerations that you might like to think about, even if you're perhaps not at the stage of wanting to start a family at the moment. Do you have other concerns about aspects that might affect your fertility? For example, having painful or irregular periods might not necessarily just be normal. Sort of put up with painful and irregular periods quite often, but they can be a sign of underlying conditions like endometriosis, for example, or the irregular periods can be quite typical with polycystic ovary syndrome, which is a PCOS. And it doesn't mean to say they are, but sometimes it can be worth getting that checked out, because people tell us that they maybe took perhaps up to 7 years to get diagnosed with endometriosis, and that does have a knock-on effect on fertility. And then as a person gets older, it starts to get more difficult. But if you are trying to conceive, but you haven't conceived maybe after a year of unprotected sex, or if you're over 35, maybe even after 4 or 6 months, still not conceiving, then that is still a little bit of a flag that maybe suggests perhaps you need to go and speak to your GP about things, just to make sure that there's not something underlying going on. Being over 35 and struggling to conceive is definitely a red flag, because we know that over 35, women's fertility particularly starts to decline. We are born with all the eggs we're ever going to have. And once they start to decline in either quantity or quality, then we can't make any more. So I think it's probably something that isn't widely known, that we think probably it'd be okay to conceive at a later stage. The other things are things like male fertility health issues. Men sometimes get a little bit left out of the equation in terms of the health checks. It's really important that men are checked out as well. If you think that you're not getting pregnant and you've had some of the checks maybe through your GP yourself, there can be issues that affect male fertility, and sperm is very affected by heat if you work in a very hot environment, or you maybe take anabolic steroids, or if there are any other issues in your general health, for example, like diabetes, or if you have thyroid problems, you're on some medication that may be perhaps a bit of a problem for conceiving. For example, antidepressants can be one. And then it's really important to go and speak to your GP about that and get checked out, so that you have a bit of an MOT, if you like, for your fertility health, and see where you are. One of the other issues people aren't aware of is that BMI can be an issue. if you are in need of fertility treatment, with the NHS criteria, you won't be eligible if your BMI is over 30, if you are deemed to be obese. And that isn't as high as you might think. It's quite a lot of people get caught out on that, and they won't actually be treated. They'll be taken off the list. And it's not because IVF perhaps won't work if your BMI is high, but it's considered to be a risk factor for high-risk pregnancy. And therefore, the NHS made the decision that they don't want to treat people and put them into a risk factor. So if you have any doubts or concerns about your health, always contact your GP. Don't wait and say, well, we'll give it another 6 months or a year, particularly if you're over 35 or over 40. Don't wait, just go and speak to your GP straight away. So in terms of fertility treatment, just to give you, I won't go into a lot of the medical side, but obviously, initially, it's really important to get some sort of diagnosis as to what's going on. Your GP might be able to do some tests. If you are wanting to look at, if it looks like you might need some more treatment at a specialist clinic, the regional fertility clinic in Belfast would be the main clinic for treatment. They have satellite outpatients, but the main treatment happens in Belfast. There is a cut-off age, and you would need to be thinking about getting a referral on to the centre if time is going on. In terms of medical treatment that's available, either privately or through the NHS, we have a whole load of letters there, which I'm not sure if you'll know what they are, but OI is, in case you come across these anyway, OI is ovulation induction. And that you might have heard of, because that's things like taking a tablet or a medicine like Clomid or another drug, which actually gets your ovaries working. And then for some people, when they do blood tests, they realize that people are not ovulating, and that can help. Beyond that, then they can have things like IUI, which is intrauterine insemination, or people who are using donor sperm, it would be DIUI. And that is maybe where the person's scanned and it's timed, and there's a bit more chance then of reaching the moment of ovulation. Beyond that, then we're looking at IVF and ICSI. ICSI is a type of IVF. IVF, if you're not aware, is where you are stimulated to produce a lot of eggs. The eggs are collected by a procedure. They are then fertilized with the sperm, and after about 5 days, an embryo is ready to be put back in as an embryo transfer. And if there are any embryos left over, if they've made several embryos that all look healthy, then some of those might be able to be frozen. Some people don't get any frozen embryos. They maybe don't have enough eggs to produce that sort of quality of a cycle. And ICSI is where they actually have, maybe if there's a male factor, or the sperm perhaps don't swim very well, they don't move, they actually take individual sperm and inject it into the egg. So fertilization is more assured, and there's more success if there's a male factor in there. So if you want to see more about any of those things, on our website, we've lots of fact sheets all about the various types of medical treatment, and also about conditions that you may have and so on. And I'll refer you to that later. But I wanted to say that in terms of fertility treatment, it's not a magic bullet, and success rates for IVF and ICSI are still relatively low. And we see a lot of celebrity social media stuff about had, IVF at, 45 and 50 or whatever, and I've had a baby, So be careful, because, many IVF treatments end in a failed cycle, and that is a bereavement in itself. Even with an early pregnancy diagnosis, sometimes there's pregnancy loss, and it's no more common in IVF or fertility treatment than in any other pregnancy. But at the same time, it's to be aware that in some ways, many fertility stories in the media end with the happiness of a baby. But there are different endings too. So we know that there are mental health aspects of going through fertility treatment. And I think it's something to seek, if you do decide to go through treatment, to seek as much support as you can throughout your journey. We can provide a lot of support. Anne has also said about, within the Education Authority about the counselling. If you do go through either NHS or private treatment, there's usually always free counselling sessions that are available to you in Northern Ireland, and they are also by Zoom or phone these days, so everybody's able to access those. And I really recommend taking up those if you get the opportunity, because it's really important that you process each stage of the waiting, the journey, and so on. And the last bit on this slide really is, we know there are barriers to treatment. The NHS funding in Northern Ireland at the moment is still pretty limited. And we know that that puts people into difficulties because they are then having to fund their own private treatment. And that's true for many other parts of the UK as well. But hopefully with the new commitment, if we can just get Stormont back up and running, then we will be able to get the last hurdle of getting the commitment and the funding to move to more cycles. And at least then, even the first cycle would be a full cycle. It would include as many goes as you have frozen embryos, if that helps. So just to look at what's actually the situation in Northern Ireland, again, I've said, about the various types of treatment. The eligibility criteria for patients was changed on the 1st of June, 2019. And the two most important criteria these days are age and BMI. So you have the age always used to be that you had to be treated before you were 40. That's still true to some extent, but there is an extension up to age 42 for people who have test results that show their ovarian reserve is of a suitable level to try and proceed with IVF. The BMI has to be below 30. And again, I've explained, that has come down from 35. And so if you are, and if you are trying to conceive anyway, actually reducing your BMI can sometimes help if you have conditions like polycystic ovary syndrome, where it's fueled by an insulin resistance. And actually by reducing BMI and weight, it can actually start to improve the ovulation process. So some people find that helps them anyway. The new criteria happily includes same-sex female couples and single women who can go forward for treatment by themselves. And eligible patients are currently entitled to one partial cycle, which is one fresh transfer. So when the embryo is made, it will be transferred on day 5. And if there is another embryo available to be frozen, you can go back on another occasion and have another try, or in happier times, maybe a sibling, but usually a second go. There are 3 clinics in Northern Ireland that provide private treatment. The RFC, the Regional Fertility Clinic, do have some private work through their own clinic, and generally they are offering those treatments sort of at cost. So that can be a good option. But there are 2 private facilities, which is Innovo, a relatively new clinic in Belfast, open about a year and a half, and Belfast Fertility, which is they're both out on the Harbour Industrial Estates. And I know that you haven't got a printout of these slides, but that is the link to the Belfast Trust RFC website, which has the full eligibility criteria. So you can have a look and see if there's anything in there that actually helps you to know. But if you can't access a copy, let us know, we'll forward you a PDF. So I suppose really what we see a lot too is the real hidden impact of going through a fertility journey, whether you actually have fertility treatment or not. It's a huge toll on both your physical and emotional well-being. Those were some of the key words that came up when we researched it with our patients. Waiting was one of the ones that came up. Despair, devastating. Depression, medicines. What we haven't got on there is the ones, who said happiness because it worked for them. So I don't want to paint a completely difficult picture, but I wanted to read you something that I saw earlier today and thought how helpful that was. It was that fertility is humankind's most precious asset, and it brings the greatest joy into our lives. But sadly, far too many people experience the pain of its flip side. And so culturally, I hope that, as a society, we can respond to the need to try and reduce stigma about fertility, recognizing that it's a medical condition, and that open up those conversations in the workplace, in the family circle, amongst friends and colleagues. We carried out some research in 2016, which was a really extensive survey. We also are redoing it currently, so the link is out there at the moment. And we asked about almost 900 people about different impacts on their mental health, on their financial health, on their work relationships, and so on. And really shockingly, we discovered that the levels of mental health issues were higher than the average for other conditions or generally in society. So 90% experienced depression, 42% said they'd experienced suicidal feelings, not always not acting on them, but they had felt desperate about it as a result of their problems. 70% said that it had some detrimental impact on their treatment, on their relationship. And 75% said they would have liked to have had counselling, but only 44% received it. Over half had to fund themselves. Now, we're very lucky in Northern Ireland. We have more access to counselling here. And 40% of male respondents felt their mental health suffered. So each year during Fertility Week, we focus one of the days specifically on men's fertility issues and their mental health. We have set up a men's support group with a campaign called Infertility, which was also initiated by the comedian Rob Gilbert. If you know Rod, he's a very funny Welshman, and he just brought this whole issue about why can't men speak about their tackle and things like that to the public eye, and he did a fantastic documentary. If you haven't seen it, it's definitely worth watching. And for those of you who are their other halves haven't come on to the webinar tonight and you'd like them to know that, we do have a lot of support for men too. So we set up our initiative Fertility in the Workplace going back in 2018. I spoke at a fairly big HR conference, and it was very clear that people wanted to know more how to help people in the workplace, because most of the people going through fertility journeys were still working, still in the workplace. So we looked at the hidden impact at work, and women and men having treatment all said they experienced conflicting demands of work and treatment, and that the most important thing in managing this conflict was workplace support and job flexibility. Now that's very difficult in all the people that might be watching this. If you're in a school and you're teaching, it's very difficult. We know, we understand that. But the experiences of support actually varied quite a lot from organisation to organisation. We found that a lot of people said that they felt that the work affected their treatment, made it difficult to manage their appointments and the stress and things, but also that even more people said they felt the treatment affected their work, that it was difficult to concentrate. They couldn't keep their mind on things. They were worrying about when they were going to get time to go to their treatment. And that actually creates a situation that we would call presenteeism, that you may have come across, which is you're there, but you're not there. And that's a really tough thing, which is going to affect people's stress. People are worried about saying to their line manager, even that they're trying to conceive, because then obviously there's the implication that they'll need maternity leave, that it might affect their career. And some people said actually that it did affect their career. They felt that. I mean, I know that Anne and the team are looking at this really closely, and I'm not wanting to paint a negative picture, because I know that they'll speak to you at the end as well about how much they really want to try and put in initiatives to help you as much as possible if you are going through a fertility journey. So we asked people, did they tell their employer? What was the level of disclosure? And actually 72% said they did disclose to their employer. But actually, when you look at it, only 41% received a great deal of support and 49% received a bit of support. But those who, when we correlated, those who had more support reported lower levels of distress through their fertility journey. And when we looked at the average number of days that people actually needed to take off during treatment, it wasn't actually that many. And so over half the people, about half, said they maybe took a week, perhaps around the time that you need to have the embryo, the egg removal and the collection, and also then maybe around the time of the embryo transfer. But in some organisations, it's very difficult to get time off, and people are having to coordinate their treatment, taking annual leave and so on. Now, obviously, this is really about time if you're going for fertility treatment, IVF and so on. If you're just at an early stage of exploring your fertility, this isn't an issue for you at the moment. So I looked into the whole question of what employee rights are for time off. And in fact, there's no automatic right for time off. It really comes under the headings of time off for medical appointments, which will be, according to your own organisation, what arrangements they make with you for that. But if you have IVF treatment, following the embryo transfer, when the embryo is put back into the woman, into the womb, there is an element of protection from the date of that transfer under pregnancy legislation, because you are deemed pregnant until the test after the 2-week wait. If your treatment is successful, then obviously maternity, employment and legislation continues on. And if you're unsuccessful, there is a protected period which is extended for a further 2 weeks. So that helps to get you through a difficult period if your cycle is not protected. So the main things about support in the workplace really are just really having a cultural understanding of what it means to be, not getting pregnant automatically, how that feels for people, and how sometimes we say the most awkward and uncomfortable things to people. I often say we only seem to have 2 topics of conversation when you meet someone you don't know very well. One is, about the weather, and the other is, do you have children? And that's such a painful and difficult question to ask somebody who actually hopes and longs for the start of a family and yet can't actually achieve that. So we need to just create that understanding of what is a support, and what are the helpful things people say, and what are the unhelpful things. But we actually asked some of our support groups to tell us. We did a workshop to, well, what is it that people say to you that's helpful? And the most helpful things was, oh, that must be difficult for you. Well, I'm here for you if you ever want to talk. The most unhelpful was either offering advice where you should just relax, go on a holiday, it's bound to happen. Because if you've got blocked tubes, that's really not helpful. And families do the same thing. So a lot of people report how difficult it is when they try to talk to their families about it and the things that people say to them. But inside the workplace, training for line managers to get a consistency of dealing with requests for time off can be really helpful. Anne's already said about the counselling and support that you have in the Education Authority, which is fantastic. But the last thing I wanted to mention to you was, we said earlier that not all stories, fertility stories, sadly end in a happy ending. And so for those people who remain childless, not by choice, there's all sorts of uncomfortable terminology of involuntary childlessness, people who really wanted children but can't. We have a support community called More to Life, and we work with and support with all the people who come to us who want to find a different way forward in what has been a mixture of chance and circumstance that they don't have children. But there is a need for an understanding in the workplace, just as if you're trying to conceive, seeing somebody's scan picture or a pregnancy announcement can be very painful, but also supporting people who maybe won't go on to have children even into later life. This was a lady, Deborah, who's from Oma, who was going through IVF, and she was having to travel, get up really early and travel down to the Belfast clinic, the Royal, at the Royal. So she didn't tell her employer, and she was getting up really early and traveling, then going back and trying to make the time up late and things. But when she started to talk to her employer about it, and we have a Fertility Network fact sheet, which she took along to help understand, he understood a little better, and the whole cycle was so much easier for her because she was going through the winter, getting up at the crack of dawn and traveling from the northwest is really very difficult for people. So one of the areas that we've been working on for some time, we launched this a few years ago, and we're hoping to roll this out in a much wider basis this year. It's a program called Your Future Fertility. And it's really about trying to create more awareness amongst younger people about things that might affect their fertility in later years. So we typically target the 16 to 25-year-old groups, whether they're still at school or students, or whether they are actually just in community, so that they understand that things like binge drinking used to be typically a student thing, though we hear more and more students who are not doing that anymore. But anabolic steroids to boost sports performance can really cause the testicles to shut down completely. Smoking is detrimental to fertility for both men and women. Recreational drugs and any of those things are really not helpful. But also there's a big rise in sexually transmitted diseases in Northern Ireland, and chlamydia is very common and can block and damage your fallopian tubes at an early age, and you wouldn't even be aware of it. So that can cause problems. So this is something that we're working on. Also later this year, we have a new program coming out, which will be launched in the October-November time, which is called Understanding Fertility. And it's a joint initiative with the British Fertility Society and ITN Productions. And we're going to be creating a series of programs which will be aiming to raise the awareness of the importance of fertility education, and helping also to reduce the stigma and shame about it, to get people talking more about it so that it becomes a much more open subject. I think maybe here in Northern Ireland, we're quite reticent at talking about things that are very personal and private, and so it still perpetuates the journey. So this is just about us, really. We try to support people wherever you are on your journey. So for the future fertility, those may be just considering what they need to think about for their fertility at any age. We support probably the biggest community is the trying to conceive community, for those who are struggling to become parents, who are already discovering that it's not quite as easy as they thought. And we help with information, with advice, and with signposting for help for them. We have also our Ace Babes community, and that's for those who happily have been successful in becoming parents. And that could be through assisted conception treatment. Donor conception is very common now, adoption or surrogacy. And we know that for some of those people who have already gone through a process of infertility, they can have remaining trauma or mental health issues. And it's nice to have the continuity. And I have to say, there's nothing nicer than opening my inbox and discovering that somebody, after a very long struggle, has had a little baby and they've sent me a picture. So that actually is really lovely to see. And our other community is our More to Life community for those who are childless not through choice. So we try to work with people throughout their reproductive life, if you like. What do we offer? Rachel and I are here to provide one-to-one support. Indeed, one or two of you have already been emailing me today, and I've been able to give them some answers by email. So you'll know that our emails are fairly responsive, even though Rachel and I are both part-time. So I'm afraid if we don't reply to you, don't panic, we will get back to you pretty quickly. But we also have our support line staffed by 2 fertility nurses, and that's open from 10 to 4 each weekday. And the links to that are on our website. When you go to our website, there's 2 big key areas. One is about all the different supports that we offer, and one is also about all the various learning informations that we provide. So our website has lots of information about different conditions, about tests, about a lot of the things that you might want to know. There are many fact sheets, and there are a very large number of recorded webinars that you can go back and search through. At the moment, there's no search engine, but if you scroll down, you'll see quite a lot. There's some on PCOS and nutrition, on all sorts of interesting areas that you might want to read or to see about. And hopefully this webinar will go there as well. Since COVID, we moved our support groups online. Thanks heavens for Zoom. But you know, the greatest thing is Zoom has turned out to be quite a warm and friendly place, and it's accessible to everyone wherever they are. So it means we're much easier to meet with people. Prior to that, we would have had groups across Northern Ireland, different locations, but sometimes it was hard for people to attend, and you can come in your pajamas if you want. We also have a really large number of specific groups now. So we are able to offer groups for 40 and over, for example, for people who have maybe had one child but now suffering secondary infertility. We've got groups for people who've had pregnancy loss. We've got groups for LGBT communities and for Black and Asian communities, and also our men's group. And there are quite a number of those specific groups which have both Zoom meetings and a special closed Facebook group. So you can get, to find a group that really fits your needs. In Northern Ireland, we also have a lovely Facebook group run by 2 of our volunteers, and that's a very friendly place too, that you can ask questions and receive a lot of support. We constantly campaigning for something or other, and our work, I suppose, along with other organisations in Northern Ireland over the last few years, has been very much to work towards campaigning for more fertility treatment for patients. And at the moment, we're also working on trying to streamline the referral process to reduce the waits for people and make sure that they get to the right person for the right reason. At the moment, we're working with the IVF Project Board through the Department of Health to help, represent patients to get the best we can for them in terms of the move to more IVF cycles. And it's a fairly advanced stage, but it now needs it has all party support across the chamber, but it now needs the executive to be able to put the decision in and get some implementation in place. As any of you who've been to the RFC will know, the capacity is very small, and so obviously a purpose-built building would be fantastic, but we're several years off that. In the meantime, we'll probably have to look at involving the private sector and so on. As a charity and in Northern Ireland, we're involved in a number of research projects. Currently, as I said, we're redoing our 2016 research project, which will give us a snapshot now of how things have changed from 2016. We did projects, research projects about how people were affected by COVID in 2020, and that was a very distressing period for people whose IVF cycles were stopped and places were closed. It resulted in very long waits, which fortunately are now much reduced. We also did some work on the impact of on men in 2021, and we're in Northern Ireland. We're involved in very early stages in discussing a project to look at the extent of trauma in infertility, and that's with Queen's University. So I think it's really important that we keep trying to find the answers, to show the need for the treatment, so that we can go to the Department of Health and say, this is the need, this must be funded, and so on. So, and the last thing on the slide really was that we are indebted to our volunteers who work with us. We're a very small team in Northern Ireland, and we have some lovely volunteers who help support our communities in all those different groups. So we do have volunteer opportunities for anybody who wants to help out, or if you want to share your story. We're actually, we've just put a call out for people to share their story anonymously on our website, so that people can hear other stories. So really, that sort of covered all I was going to say tonight. Our website, if you don't know, it does have a wealth of information, and I've put up there as well the support line numbers. Diane works Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Janet works Tuesdays and Thursdays, but they are two lovely ladies with experience as former fertility nurses. And whilst they may not be able to answer all your medical questions, because sometimes they need to say, you need to speak to your clinician about that, but they can sometimes answer queries that you may have about what does this mean, or what should I do next, sort of thing. And of course, you're very welcome to contact myself, Hilary, or Rachel by our email. That's the quickest way to get us. And what I'll do is I just want to say thank you for listening. And what we do is I'll just pop that back to our contact details in case you want to write those down. And in the meantime, I will stop the sharing, and we will see. I will pass over to Anne, and when I've done that, then we will take questions.
Okay. Hilary, I just want to say a huge thank you. That was so informative, and lots of really interesting and useful information in your presentation. Thank you. I hope everyone that's on tonight has found that useful. Look, I just wanted to say again, just to remind people, if there were issues raised there that has caused people distress, to remember about the Inspire Confidential Counselling Service. And again, if anyone feels that there's something from a work-related perspective that they would like to maybe reach out to Julie, Emma, or myself, our email addresses, it's really just our names, ann.rath@eani.org.uk, and then julie.ferry@eani, and emma.patterson@eani.org.uk. So look, we'll be only too happy if you have something specific about, if it's time off or policy or whatever. And as Hilary has kind of outlined at the start, it is something we're kind of at the very beginning of the journey, in terms of trying to look at developing a policy, and it's something over a number of years that we've been very aware that it's something that's missing, and we get a lot of questions within the health and wellbeing team, and also equality, about is there a policy and what do I do for time off? And I know that there's different practices throughout the EA, and different managers treat it very differently, and we would like to see a real change, and I suppose that openness, and that being able to have that conversation, and being able to go to your line manager or speak to colleagues about I'm going through fertility treatment, and here's what it means for me, and the time off and things like that. And we don't want anyone to feel disadvantaged, but we have a fairly good annual leave entitlement and leave within EA, so hopefully we're able to work with that. And I appreciate within the school settings it can be so difficult, but again, we'll welcome any questions. But again, a huge thank you, Hilary, yourself, and to Rachel. That was really, really useful. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. That's lovely.